The beginning, a small dispute. On a crisp Saturday morning in early fall, Maple Grove Drive buzzed with the ordinary sounds of suburbia. Lawn mowers hummed in concert. Children's shrieks of laughter floated over manicured hedges, and two houses stood side by side, separated by an old wooden fence that had seen better days. Jack Carter drove the final nail into the beam of his new garden shed. Sweat clung to his brow, and the faded flannel shirt he wore was darkened at the collar. "Not bad," he said, stepping back to admire the handiwork. Jack enjoyed these small triumphs, a fresh start after years working long, thankless hours at the plant outside town. Just then, a voice pierced the morning air. "Hey, Jack, watch what you're doing there!" It was Tom Riley, his neighbor. Tom, early 50s, stocky and red-faced, wore a permanent frown, as if the sun itself was a personal affront. Jack turned, forcing a smile. "Morning, Tom. Just trying to get my place in order." Tom pointed to the edge of the garden. "Your shed's real close to the property line. Hope you measured that out. Last thing we want is trouble about boundaries." Jack wiped his hands on his jeans. "I checked the lot lines. Should be all right by code." Tom grunted, not mollified. He picked at a loose fence plank and shot Jack a look. "Just saying, property disputes get ugly real quick. You know, if that thing's over the line, I got to call the association." A tension seeped into the air, subtle but real. Jack's jaw tensed. He'd heard stories about Tom, how every little thing became a battle. Garbage cans left out, branches overhanging the fence, even the color of porch lights. But so far, things had been cordial. He wanted to keep it that way, if possible. "I'll double-check," Jack said evenly. "No one wants problems around here." Tom grinned, but it never reached his eyes. "Good man. Lot of folks these days, they just do what they want." He turned and stomped back to his house, where his wife glanced curiously from the widow's first retaliation. Long after the day's warmth had seeped from the sky and left the neighborhood bathed in cool twilight, Jack Carter sat at his kitchen table, pretending to read the newspaper, while Lisa washed dishes at the sink. The weight of his conversation with Tom Riley clung to him like dust he couldn't shake off. Around 9, Jack peeked out the window. Maple Grove Drive was still, wrapped in shadows and the chorus of crickets. Most houses were dark now, lights flickering out, families retreating into sleep. Only the Rileys' back porch glowed. Jack saw Tom pacing near the fence, a beer bottle dangling from his hand. "Honey, I'm turning in," Lisa said softly, her eyes searching his face for worry. "I'll be up soon," Jack murmured, making excuses to check the locks and take out the little bag of trash. When Lisa's footsteps faded upstairs, Jack slipped out the back. He lingered at the fence, letting the crisp night air cool his nerves. The shed looked fine, untouched. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling he stood at the edge of something. One wrong word, one wrong move, and this tension would break loose. People always said trouble came in threes, but this time it came in one, silent, swift, petty. The following morning, Jack stepped outside and found his wife frozen by the flower beds, her robe pulled tight against the dawn chill. Flowers, hydrangeas and lilies, which she had planted with careful love just 2 weeks ago, lay shredded on the ground. Petals trodden underfoot, stems snapped and bent. Jack cursed under his breath and looked up, instinctively glancing toward the Rileys' yard. Nothing was out of place. There, Tom's mower rested neatly under its tarp. The Riley dog, a fat aging beagle, snoozed lazily in the sun. Lisa looked at Jack, her voice quivering. "Who would do this?" Jack stared at the ruined flowers. He wanted to believe it was just some neighborhood kid, maybe a stray animal, but he felt Tom's words echo in his ears. Property disputes get ugly real quick. Was this just a coincidence? He knelt down, picking up a battered purple bloom. I'll clean this up, don't worry about it, he said, forcing the door. Jack found himself at the edge of the fence, measuring the distance from his shed again, eyes hard with resolve. This was no longer about boundary lines. This was about respect, about standing up for your family. With the sun dipping below the roof lines, Jack quietly loosened a single fence plank on Tom's side, just enough that it would fall with the next windy night, not enough to cause true harm, but enough to make a statement. As he returned inside, he caught his reflection in the glass door, tension in his shoulders, jaw set. He hadn't wanted this, but sometimes you didn't get a choice. Sometimes the battle came to your own backyard, whether you were ready or not. And now it seemed the quiet little war between neighbors had truly begun. Rumors and hidden motives. By the end of the week, the strange tension that had begun with a ruined flower bed now whispered through the seams of Maple Grove Drive. The air, usually sweet as cut grass and barbecue smoke, thickened with half glances and muttered conversations that faded whenever Jack Carter approached. At first, Jack tried to convince himself he was imagining things, but by Wednesday, even Lisa noticed the difference. When she waved across the street, the Lewises, 3 houses down, looked through her as if she weren't there. Later, at the mailbox, old Mrs. Hawthorne, who never missed an opportunity to chat, clutched her dog's leash tighter and mumbled, "Busy day," before shuffling away. "Do you notice people acting weird lately?" Lisa asked that evening, stirring soup on the stove. Jack set the table, careful not to look up. "Just fall allergies, maybe. Changes the mood." She gave him a tired half-smile. "Nobody's allergic to saying hello." Jack knew what was happening. He recognized it from 1,000 work break rooms, the way rumors spread like wildfire and isolation set in. The only question was, what stories were being told about his family? He didn't have to wonder for long. At the next HOA meeting, a monthly ordeal he usually avoided, he caught the tail end of Tom Riley's voice, clear and assertive. "Not against newcomers," Tom was saying to a small circle. "But you see what happens when people don't respect boundaries. I mean, just look at the new shed going up, right on the line." The entire neighborhood. Jack couldn't help but remember years ago. A rumor about Tom losing a job over neighbor trouble, but details were fuzzy, buried under layers of small-town gossip. Meanwhile, the Riley household bustled with new energy. Tom's wife baked a pie for the Hawthorns. Their daughter helped rake leaves up and down the street. Each act, Jack realized, was another strand in the web, making connections, buying loyalty, casting his own family adrift. That night, Jack confided in Lisa. "He wants everyone against us," Jack said. "And maybe there's something he stands to gain." Lisa rested her hand on his arm. "No matter what others say, we know the truth. We just have to keep our heads." Jack tried to draw comfort from her words, but unease prickled at his skin. Tom's campaign was more than a squabble. It was a warning. In Maple Grove Drive, respect wasn't given, it was taken. And Jack wasn't sure anymore how far Tom Riley might go. Somewhere beyond the windows, laughter drifted across the lawns. Happy voices from another house, a different world. For the Carters, the walls were inching closer, the shadows lengthening, and alliances already shifting in the dark. The first dirty trick. It was almost midnight when Jack finally drifted off to sleep, the low moan of the autumn wind rattling the bedroom window. He barely heard Lisa murmur goodnight, nor the faint click of a car door outside. If he had, he might have woken, might have looked out into the swirling darkness. Instead, he dreamed restless dreams, Fences toppling, neighbors whispering in the street, Lisa's flowers blooming wild in someone else's yard. The next morning began like any other. Lisa hummed softly in the kitchen, the smell of coffee curling through the house. Jack pulled on a flannel, still heavy with sleep, and went out to collect the newspaper. He noticed nothing unusual, not at first, though the silence hung heavier than normal in the street. But by 8 a.m., the quiet was broken by the sharp wail of approaching sirens. 2 police cars slid to a stop in front of the Carter's house, blue and red lights flashing noiselessly in the pale sunrise. With the officers tramped through his garden, poking around the shed and side gates. It was humiliating, standing there in full view of Tom, who watched from his porch with an unreadable expression. A mug lifted to his lips, eyes invisible behind sunglasses. Lisa tried to comfort Jack when the officers had finally left, finding nothing but trampled grass and unease. "It's over. They didn't find anything." Jack shook his head. That wasn't the point. Every curious glance from a neighbor, every whispered, "That's them," burned like a fresh bruise. That afternoon, a neighborhood email thread began to circulate, subtle, casual, but loaded with implication. "Let's all be a little more vigilant. Report suspicious behavior. Watch out for each other." Jack read it twice, his ears ringing. He knew who had started the thread. Tom Riley's name glinted at the top like a threat. Later, while Lisa napped restlessly, Jack slipped out back. The fence stood stoic, the shadows growing longer. He stared at the neat line dividing their yards, at the mug stain Tom had left on the post that morning. Jack's hand shook, but not from cold. After a long moment, he snapped off a brittle branch, sending it tumbling into Tom's garden. It was petty. It was pointless. But in a world where neighbors called the cops instead of talking, every gesture felt like a declaration. As the sun set over Maple Grove Drive, Jack realized the worst part wasn't the shame. It was the knowledge that he'd just lost the first round, and his opponent was only warming up. Retaliation escalates. Attack on property. Rain swept into Maple Grove overnight, soft at first, drumming steadily against the rooftops until dawn. Jack woke early to the familiar chorus, rain on tin, the low groan of wind, gutters pushing streams down the street. For a fleeting moment, he let himself believe the storm might wash away the bad blood gathering at his fence line. When he stepped out to his garage, the dream vanished. A small lake stretched across the concrete floor, brown water lapping against the mower's wheels and the bottom shelf stacked with old paint cans. Boxes floated, their cardboard skin melting. A tart, muddy smell bit at Jack's nose as he waded through the mess. Shoulders. Now and then, he glanced up at the Carter property, eyes narrowed in the silver light. Jack spent hours cleaning up. He tossed the waterlogged boxes and used towels to dam the flow, teeth set against the injustice of it all. Each scrape and shiver felt personal. When he finished, he yanked the ruined drain pipe out entirely, flinging what was left into the trash with a violence he hoped would carry across the yard. That night, as the storm faded, Jack sat in the kitchen, shoulders stooped. Lisa handed him a mug of tea, her hands trembling. "This has to stop," she whispered. "We can't live like this." Jack took a long breath, then shook his head. "He won't stop, Lise. Not until he thinks we're beaten." Lisa hesitated. "Should we call the police? The HOA?" Jack thought about the officers searching his backyard last week, about Tom's network of friends wound tightly through every committee and thread. He imagined being met with polite disbelief, a thin smile, a nod, nothing more. The neighborhood, he realized, belonged to whoever shouted the loudest first, and Tom Riley had done just that. So Jack made a decision. That evening, as dusk gathered, he reinforced the base of the fence with steel mesh, digging under the pretense of repair, all the while knowing he was really building a barricade. He muttered oaths under his breath, careful to glance over his shoulder, but unafraid of being seen. A single yellow tulip, battered by the storm, drooped by the edge of Lisa's ruined flower bed. Jack stooped and plucked it. He carried it back to the kitchen, handing it gently to Lisa, his quiet promise. But as she turned away, tears brimming, Jack stared out the rain-streaked window at the Rileys' house. The storm outside had passed, but inside, trouble only gathered weight. He knew this was no longer a spat about boundaries or a pettiness about sheds. This was war, a dirty one, and now it stretched from doorsteps to flooded garages, from rumor to vandalism in the rain, and Jack Carter, whether he wanted to or not, was in it for the long haul. Lines drawn, taking sides. The week after the flooding, the weather on Maple Grove Drive routine, each one public and impossible to ignore. He was building a camp, and people flocked to its fire. Soon, whenever Tom held court at the end of his driveway, a tight knot of neighbors gathered, voices low, but laughter forced. One Thursday, Jack returned home to find a fluorescent HOA notice taped to his front door. All residents must ensure yard standards are maintained. Complaints have been logged about debris and unsightly structures. Immediate remediation required. Jack's stomach clenched as he crumpled the paper in his fist. The rules were the pretext, but the real message was clear. Tom's side of the line was growing, and Jack was the outsider. Lisa tried to fight it in her own quiet way. She baked cookies and delivered them to several houses, smiling earnestly at every doorstep. But the returns were nervous, hurried thank yous, doors closing quickly behind her. When she returned home, the gentle hope on her face had faded. But there were exceptions, a quiet resistance. Mrs. Hawthorne, who had witnessed the police cars that morning and disliked unnecessary drama, began visiting Lisa, often bearing a fresh loaf of bread and a straightforward opinion. "I don't care what people say," she grumbled over tea. "If the Rileys want gossip, let them eat their own words." And there was young Evan Morales, who, while mowing his own patchy lawn, gave Jack a surreptitious thumbs up, a small but meaningful solidarity. As the days passed, the division hardened. Where neighbors once waved across driveways, now they stared straight ahead. Gardeners on one side of the street barely acknowledged those on the other, as if invisible trenches ran along the cracked asphalt. Even the children played in separate clusters, friendships a casualty of adult warfare. One evening, Lisa came in from watering the battered flower beds and set a letter on the table. No name, just their address penciled in careful block letters. "Don't let them win. Hang in there. Not everyone believes Tom's stories." For once, Jack allowed himself a small smile. The opposition was outnumbered, but tension that already hung thick between the houses. Jack Carter felt it every time he stepped outside, every movement watched, every routine act weighed and measured by unseen eyes. He'd started parking his old blue truck further up the street, closer to the intersection, not just for the walk, but to avoid the cluster of Tom Riley's allies who liked to linger near the mailboxes. Still, word made its way to him through the grapevine. Tom had started dropping casual hints that maybe Jack's night walks were odd, that maybe not everyone liked how late the Carter's porch light sometimes stayed on. It was on one such evening, dusky, air vibrating with tired insects and the coming storm, that Jack came home late. Lisa was out tending her bruised flower bed, her hands working deftly, the bruises of the summer's battle still showing in the splintered stems. As Jack walked up, she straightened and looked at him, worry bright in her eyes. "They were out here again," she said, her voice low, "talking about us. I heard Tom say something about only wanting good people in this neighborhood." "It'll end. Jack murmured, though he didn't believe it, not yet. As dusk laid its purple weight across the lawns, Jack gathered the garbage cans at the curb. He was halfway up the driveway when he heard footsteps crunching on gravel. He didn't have to look up to know it was Tom. The presence, the hush that fell over the street, announced him before his voice did. "Evening, Jack." Tom's tone was coolly polite, the kind of voice lawyers used before a fight. Jack nodded, but didn't stop stacking the bins. "Evening, Tom." Tom folded his arms across his chest, lingering at the fence's edge. "Tough break about the garage. People been saying you're blaming me for it." Jack's shoulders stiffened. He tossed the last can beside the garage in turn, drawing a slow breath. "People say what you want them to say, Tom. I can't control what neighbors think." Tom's words were sugar-coated, but his eyes glinted hard in the twilight. "Maybe if you guys acted more neighborly, folks wouldn't talk." Jack's jaw tightened. "We keep to ourselves, that's not a crime. No, but making trouble is. And my family isn't going anywhere." For a second, Tom looked as if he might say something more, something that would spin the entire neighborhood into open hostilities. But then he only laughed softly, a dismissive, chilling sound, and walked away, his back straight, army already in tow. Jack stood rooted, feeling anger and relief twisting together inside him. He watched until Tom disappeared behind his porch light, a king returning to his castle. Lisa joined him in the driveway. She rested her head on his shoulder. "Did it help?" she asked, voice trembling with hope and exhaustion. Jack squeezed her hand. "I think he knows we won't fold." Night took hold of Maple Grove Drive. Porch lights lit up one by one, illuminating each home's separate world. For once, Jack felt the thin, fragile thread that kept him tethered to this place pull a little tighter, not weaker. The first real battle had been fought. No fists, no shouting, only words and the shaping of will. But Jack knew there were more to come. He was ready now, because sometimes you had to stand in the dark and let them see you weren't afraid to be seen. The following week dawned brittle and bright, as if autumn couldn't decide whether to settle in for good or offer one last reminder of summer. Jack noticed small differences right away. Nothing dramatic, just the shift of routine, the sense that people watched more quietly and for different reasons. Where once every word whispered behind maple trees it carried the poison of suspicion, now something else was gathering in the air. It felt like hope, but fragile. An egg in the wind, trembling as the neighborhood held its breath. Lisa was the first to risk a new routine. She spent Saturday afternoon tending her battered flowers, humming softly, her hands gentle on each stem. Across the fence, Mrs. Hawthorne sat out knitting, her wrinkled fingers attacking black yarn as if it were Tom Riley's reputation. This time, when Lisa greeted her, the old woman smiled. "You're stronger than you look, dear," she called, voice carrying across the unspoken age bestowed, and soon the mood on Maple Grove began a slow pivot. Tom Riley must have felt it too. Jack caught sight of him one afternoon, working in his yard with a little too much energy, casting furtive glances toward the Carter's place. Tom's friends, once so quick to cluster and laugh, started to disperse earlier in the evening. Some even nodded at Jack, shamefaced but earnest, as if apologizing for Tom's excesses. Late Sunday, Lisa found something folded in the mailbox, a real letter this time, written in careful, looping script. "We don't want the drama. We miss how it used to be here. Maybe some of us went along with things too quickly, but not everyone is happy about it. Please don't give up on us." She cried when she read it, hope and exhaustion tangled together. Jack hugged her by the window, drawing comfort from her tears. "We won't," he promised quietly. "We're still here." By Tuesday, things felt different in small, essential ways. Mrs. Hawthorne brought over pumpkin muffins and sat for coffee with Lisa, neither caring who saw. Evan offered to patch a spot on Jack's fence for old time's sake. Kids played again, their games crossing invisible boundaries in the grass. At the edges of all this, Tom Riley withdrew, his shadow shrinking as his grip loosened. He was still there, still bristling with wounded pride, but each day his empire of whispers grew smaller. The greater Maple Grove didn't immediately return to what it was. Trust is slow to mend, suspicion even slower to fade. But something new was growing, stubborn as lawn grass in the sidewalk crack. And as Jack sat on his porch that evening, watching the sunset bleed gold through the trees, he let himself believe that change, real, neighborhood change, had found a way in. A fragile peace. Maple Grove slipped into October under skies that alternated between satin blue and storms threatening at the horizon. The air was cool and light, laced with the scent of turning leaves and wood smoke from early evening fires. For the first time in weeks, Jack Carter walked to get the mail without bracing himself for a confrontation. Lisa was at the kitchen table, sorting through recipes for Thanksgiving. Her voice, when Jack stepped back inside, sounded agreeing to get along. Only half the wounds were visible. The rest lingered quietly, sharp and tender, beneath the surface. That Saturday, as he trimmed the overgrown hedges, Jack heard angry voices down the street. Tom Riley, shouting with his wife about traitors and cowards, loud enough that old Mrs. Kimball closed her window with a shaky hand. The men who once orbited Tom at block parties no longer gathered, their loyalty battered and scattered. But he had not forgotten, nor forgiven. That evening, Maple Grove's first fragile show of unity arrived in the form of a spontaneous barbecue, organized by Evan and Mrs. Hawthorne with a batch email and the promise of burgers. When Jack and Lisa arrived, hand in hand, they lingered on the edge of the crowd, uncertainty coiling tight in Jack's stomach. Then came the greetings, a cascade of invitations to join cornhole games, a wave of cups and laughter, Mrs. Hawthorne's sturdy embrace. Children darted back and forth like dragonflies, ignorant of rifts or old wounds. Jack watched as a soccer ball strayed close to the Riley house. Tom's son, Alex, hesitated, then, with a nervous glance at his father's dark window, kicked it back into the game. Nothing was said, but Jack caught his eye and gave a nod. Alex returned it with a thin, relieved smile. As dusk settled, Lisa found herself in a circle of neighbors, telling stories about her childhood in Vermont. Jack joined Evan and a few others to talk tools and football scores. There was no grand apology, no confrontation with Tom. Instead, peace pressed forward on unsure feet, built of ordinary acts of kindness and hesitant conversation. The barbecue ended as the first stars blinked on overhead, everyone lingering just a little longer. But as Jack and Lisa walked back to their house, fatigue weighing them down, they saw Tom Riley standing alone, in silhouette by his porch light, smoking and scowling at the laughter drifting his way. Jack felt an ache of sympathy, a warning, too. Tom was not finished. Old wounds did not heal without care, and even the smallest match could set this fragile piece over in the night. Mrs. Hawthorne's carefully arranged pots smashed on the sidewalk in a neat, vengeful row. Some neighbors muttered about raccoons, but Jack saw the way Tom Riley lingered by his mailbox each morning, jaw clenched, eyes never meeting Jack's. Lisa found footprints by the back gate, large, heavy, smeared in mud as though someone wanted them to be found. "He wants us afraid again," Jack said, tension twisting his voice. Lisa's eyes darkened, but she nodded in grim agreement. One Thursday evening, with the wind rising outside, Lisa heard a thunk against the house while she set the table. She rushed to the window and saw something strange flickering in the yard. Jack joined her, heart pounding. There, pressed into the grass, were 6 plastic forks. An old prank in some places, but here it felt more like a warning. Jack walked the perimeter with a flashlight, his breath steaming in the crisp air. Every shadow seemed to writhe. He returned inside, locking every window, the unease settling into his bones. That weekend, during a particularly gloomy afternoon, the peace broke entirely. Screaming echoed from 2 doors down, the Moraleses, and Jack saw Tom in a wild argument with Evan's father, their words too hot to be concealed. Tom's voice rose above the wind. "You think you're so much better? You're just as much an outsider as they are. Do you really believe they'll ever accept you?" Evan's father didn't back down, and neighbors watched from their windows, torn between anger and fear. The old lines threatened to form again. Inside their home, Jack and Lisa stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the spectacle unfold from their window. Jack felt a wave of guilt for having hoped things would settle so easily. Lisa squeezed his arm. "We have to do something, Jack. We can't just let him ruin this neighborhood for everyone again." As night fell, Lisa gathered her courage and called Mrs. Hawthorne, her voice steady. "We need to meet as neighbors," she said. "We need to show him we're not afraid." Within days, a new plan took shape. Flyers appeared on doors calling for a block meeting. No HOA, no pairs and trios, clutching umbrellas, shuffling up the walk with uncertain determination. Mrs. Hawthorne brought still warm banana bread and her sharp tongue. Evan came with his father, the two no longer shrinking from the conflict that had edged into every conversation for weeks. Even the Lewises, usually quiet and neutral, showed up with nervous, apologetic smiles. Lisa greeted each guest with spirited hugs. Jack shook every hand, his own fingers trembling in the dim light, not sure if from adrenaline, fear, or hope. The living room filled up, and so did the tension, the weight of unspoken grievances pressing against the walls, nearly louder than the patter of rain overhead. No one noticed the storm outside anymore. All eyes were on the circle inside. Jack cleared his throat and rose from the edge of the coffee table, searching for the right words. "We all know why we're here," he began, voice steady but soft. "This neighborhood is hurting. It doesn't matter who started it, or even who was right. We have to decide what kind of place Maple Grove is going to be. If we don't, someone else will keep deciding for us." For a moment, silence reigned. Then Mrs. Hawthorne spoke up, her voice quick and indignant. "We've let one man's bitterness poison everything good about this street. I've seen it before, breaks my heart every time. If we don't stand up together, it's nothing but misery ahead." Evan's father nodded. "I moved my family here to feel safe, not to spend every day wondering which side I'm on or if my kid will be caught in the middle." A chorus of quiet affirmations passed through the group. One by one, people confessed their fears and regrets, the things they should have said, the invitations they withheld, the courage they'd lost and lately tried to recover. "It doesn't have to stay like this," Lisa said, her voice thin but clear. "We can look out for each other again, talk openly, step in when someone tries to scare us into silence." Jack looked around, searching each face. "Whoever wants the living room." Slowly, something human began to thaw. It wasn't forgiveness yet, nor anything easy, but it was a crack in the wall, an opening the storm couldn't close. One by one, neighbors found their courage, voices rising, not to fight, but to claim their home and their hope together. And in that old crowded living room, to the gentle drum of rain, Maple Grove Drive took its first tiny steps on the long road back to itself. The turning point. The following day dawned pale and clean. The storm clouds finally swept away, leaving the air sharp and full of wary promise. For the first time in months, Maple Grove felt lighter. Even from behind closed curtains, people seemed to sense the change. There was a different cadence to footsteps on the sidewalks, a hesitancy giving way to something like cautious optimism. Jack awoke to the unfamiliar sound of laughter riding the morning breeze. Lisa was already downstairs, brewing coffee and humming softly, her shoulders eased of their usual tension. They sat together at the kitchen table, quietly reliving the memory of the previous night, the murmured pledges, the trembling confessions, the first cracks in walls long held up by suspicion and pride. Word of the meeting spread quickly. By noon, Mrs. Hawthorne and Evan's father were knocking on doors, gathering signatures for a community statement, one promising respect, safety, and an end to intimidation. A few hesitant families politely declined, but many more added their names, eyes shining with relief. Jack and Lisa spent the afternoon walking Maple Grove, hand in hand, waving to neighbors who waved back, a gesture once simple, now brave. Meanwhile, Tom Riley's house looked smaller than it had before, its windows dark save for the flicker of a lone television. Most expected him to stay home, brooding in the shadow of lost power, but near dusk he appeared at the edge of his yard. He watched as Mrs. Hawthorne and Evan's father carried a folder brimming with signatures to Jack and Lisa. Early evening sunlight caught the silver in his hair. He seemed, for the first time, out of place among the life returning all around him. As the street, he took the folder from Mrs. Hawthorne. His hand shook as he scrawled his name beneath the list. He looked up, not with triumph, but with the weary surrender of a man who'd lost a battle no one else wanted to win. A sigh of relief swept the circle. Someone laughed, soft and surprised. Even Tom, for just an instant, managed a fleeting, uncertain smile. As dusk deepened, families lingered on their lawns. Children chased after fireflies. Porch lights clicked on in sequence, not to ward off the world, but to light a homecoming. Later, as Jack and Lisa settled together on the porch, she rested her head on his shoulder, content at last. "It won't be perfect," she whispered. "No," Jack agreed, "but it doesn't have to be. As long as we keep talking, keep reaching for each other, we'll make it work." Down on Maple Grove, a neighborhood found the courage to start again, and this time, even the broken things began to heal. One day, one step, one shared hope at a time.